Chapter 484. Interesting. Closing the book down, the same figure turned to look in my direction. Our eyes met. Plike, plike, plike. Taking a step forward, the rattling sound of the chains echoed throughout the room. Staring at the chains from the corner of my eyes, I was left surprised by the fact that the chains were directly coming from the ground of the room. Though confusing, I stopped paying attention to this detail as the other figure soon neared me. Coming to a halt beside Professor Thomas, the other figure slowly raised his head, revealing two deep blue eyes. A slight smile tugged in between his lips. "So you're telling me that from the very beginning you suspected that I had something to do with this situation?" he asked with an amused look on his face. "You can say so." I calmly nodded my head and replied. Glancing at Thomas for a brief second, I looked back up at the other Ren. Like I've said before, from the moment that something happened with Aaron's dad, I already suspected that something was going on, and the moment that I met Professor Thomas, my suspicions became even more glaring. Lowering my hand, I began to tap on the armrest of the chair. It was right at the moment that Professor Thomas mentioned my name, 876, that I was able to somewhat gauge what you were planning. Of course, since there was the possibility of you possibly reading my mind, I decided to take countermeasures. Raising my hand, I pressed my finger on the temple of my head. If you could have read my mind, then you could have easily been able to tell that I was merely playing along with you. Even though I was having most of my thought processes inside of my chip in order to hide them, you should have still been able to determine my intent. Taking into account the possibility of Ren being able to read my mind, I decided to take some precautions. Since whenever I used the chip, my thoughts happened within a fraction of a second, I had a sudden thought. What if I used the chip to hide my real thoughts? What if the chip was fast enough to hide my real thoughts from the other entity? And so that was exactly what I did. Whenever I wanted to think about him, I just activated the chip. In that split second that I activated the chip, I would quickly contemplate everything that was happening around me. Letting out a long sigh, I shook my head. Unfortunately, there is a glaring flaw with this method. Raising my head, I met the other Ren's eyes. The flaw is that even though I might be able to hide from you exactly what I'm thinking, it's practically impossible for me to completely hide my thoughts. It just isn't. Regardless of how fast I was thinking, if the other Ren was truly capable of reading my mind, he should have been able to pick up my intentions regardless of how small they were. Still, this was what I wanted to begin with. I wanted him to find this out so that I could properly gauge whether he could read my mind or not. However, it didn't seem like he could. Had he done so, he would have found out that I had already made countermeasures for his plan. And thus this only meant one thing. "You can't read my mind." Pursing my lips, I asked. "I'm right, aren't I?" Though I said that, I wasn't exactly 100% sure. After all, with everything I went through with him, the possibility of me being purposely misled wasn't impossible. Once again I was met with no response. Regardless, I continued. Visit lworld.com for a better user experience. Anyhow, let's say that my hypothesis is correct and that you can't read my mind. How are you capable of always being a couple of steps ahead of me? Pausing, I glanced at the other Ren from the corner of my eyes. After thinking about it for quite a while, I came up with one conclusion. I paused. "You know the future." At the exact moment those words left my mouth, the temperature of the room chilled considerably. The edges of my lips curled upwards. If you think about it, that makes sense. For him to have been able to plan the scenario with Angelica and Amanda's mother, there is simply no way you could have done that without knowing that I would end up being the Elven domain and that the only way to cure her mother was through the Zuran fruit, which I so happened to have. Also, the fact that he knew about the novel world was probably the biggest clue regarding the possibility of him knowing the future. Since you know the future, it also gives me the idea that the memories inside of my head were in fact implanted by you. The more I thought about it, the more plausible this possibility became. Even though the memories inside of my mind were possibly fake, the fact that they were a representation of the future was undeniable. For the other Ren to know about the future and to be inside of my head, I could only think of one thing. He was the one that had planted the memories inside of my head. Or at least he knew who was the one responsible for this. Crossing my arms together, I licked my lips. You know, I've always been curious. Even if you don't answer, I'll still ask, but... The sound of my fingers tapping on the armrest of the chair echoed throughout the room. "Is Everblood working for you?" Even though I already knew the answer, I wanted to get proper confirmation from the other Rin himself. You don't have to pretend otherwise, I'm... Yes. It was then that, cutting me off, the other Rin spoke up. My brow raised in surprise. Didn't think he would answer so quickly. So you finally decided to speak? I instantly sat up straight. Thud. Grabbing Professor Thomas by the hair, the other Rin dragged him out of the chair and dumped his body on the ground. He then proceeded to sit down on the chair opposite. My brows furrowed tightly. I only noticed it now, but he also touched the book before, right? It was at the exact moment that he grabbed Thomas's hair that I realized that he had also been able to touch the book from the bookshelf. This made me realize something. He is no longer just a projection. How did that happen? Before I could open my mouth, the other Rin started to speak. His next words caused the frown on my face to deepen. You don't have to be wary of Everblood. What do you mean? I leaned my body even more. You think I don't about the shit that he pulled? Interlocking his hands, the other Rin shook his head. His deep and detached voice rang across the room. Is Everblood working for you? Even though I already knew the answer, I wanted to get proper confirmation from the other Rin himself. You don't have to pretend otherwise, I'm... Yes. It was then that, cutting me off, the other Rin spoke up. My brow raised in surprise. Didn't think he would answer so quickly. So you finally decided to speak? I instantly sat up straight. Thud. Grabbing Professor Thomas by the hair, the other Rin dragged him out of the chair and dumped his body on the ground. He then proceeded to sit down on the chair opposite. My brows furrowed tightly. I only noticed it now, but he also touched the book before, right? It was at the exact moment that he grabbed Thomas's hair that I realized that he had also been able to touch the book from the bookshelf. This made me realize something. He is no longer just a projection. How did that happen? Before I could open my mouth, the other Rin started to speak. His next words caused the frown on my face to deepen. You don't have to be wary of Everblood. What do you mean? I leaned my body even more. You think I don't about the shit that he pulled? Interlocking his hands, the other Rin shook his head. His deep and detached voice rang across the room. What did I say before? My eyes began to squint. What is he on about? Staring into his deep blue eyes, I lowered my head slightly. There are a lot of things that you've essay. Just as I was about to finish my sentence, the other Rin quickly cut in. I'm not your enemy. Huh. I once again raised my head to meet his eyes. You're not my enemy? Yes. The other Rin nodded his head. PFT. I immediately scoffed. You think I will believe that after everything that you've done to me? In fact, extending my hand and tapping on my watch, I opened up the news article from before. The one about my identity being that of 876. Breaking news. Recent revelations have been made that Rin Dover, the missing student from the lock, is in fact 876. Because of his excellent performance at the conference, he made a deal with the union and framed Aaron Rhinestone. Read more. Does this look like something someone who is trying to help me would do? Wordlessly staring at my watch for a good couple of seconds, the other Rin took his eyes away from it. As I've said before, I'm not your enemy. Once again he repeated the same thing. I secretly clenched my fists underneath my table. Bullshit. I irritably replied. What have you done to ever prove to me otherwise? All you've done is messed with my mind and... Taking out a potion from my dimensional space, I smacked it on the table. Plack. Had it not been for these, I would have probably once again fallen for your scheme. The potion was none other than the potion that Melissa had given me. Had it not been for that potion, I would have most likely fallen for Professor Thomas's mind games. People said that the scariest enemies were ones that were strong, however, I beg to differ. To me, the strongest and most dangerous enemies were ones that could read your thoughts and push the right buttons. Just like Professor Thomas. Had it not been for the potions Melissa had given me, and the fact that I knew that something was up, then perhaps, the outcome would have been much different. Upon smacking the bottle on the table, a brief moment of silence ensued. The silence was soon broken by the other Rin. I'll repeat it one more time. I'm not your enemy. Be it me or Everblood. We are not your enemies. You may not figure things out now, however you will soon know. Pausing, the other Rin stood up. Plike, plike, plike. Once again the rattling sound of the chains hitting each other echoed throughout the room. With his hands behind his back, the other Ren began to walk all the way toward the bookshelf of the room. His feet soon came to a pause. Lowering his head, he glanced at the chains binding his body. I don't have much time, so I will only say a couple more words. Like. Without a loud metallic sound, the lax chains suddenly straightened. Ignoring them, the other Ren stared toward the window of the room. Or to be more precise, toward the sky. Use monarch indifference. Huh. My head moved back. Why in the world would I use? If you want strength, use monarch's indifference. So far you've only used a small fraction of its powers. Like. The chains suddenly started to exert more power. However, the other Ren simply ignored them. If things ever reach a point where you will die, use monarch's indifference. I will show you just how powerful you are. Like. Slowly, the other Ren's body started to get wrapped by the chains. Soon his whole body was enveloped by them, and just as he was about to be dragged to the ground, he was able to utter a couple of more words. I'm impressed by the fact that you've been able to outplay me for once. However, don't get ahead of yourself. You are still not out of the waters just yet. Right as his words faded, his body disappeared and the door of the room flung open. Click. Ren. The first one to come into the room was Donna. Behind her were multiple different professors. Ren, I've been trying to contact. Entering the room, Donna's footsteps suddenly came to a halt. Upon entering the room, her eyes locked on me for a brief moment before they paused on Professor Thomas's lifeless body close to me. It took a bit of time for her to process the situation, and when she did, she looked at me and asked, "What happened?" Chapter 485. What is going on, Ren? Donna's voice echoed throughout the room. It's nothing. I briefly replied as I turned to look at Professor Thomas's dead body on the floor. It's nothing. I repeated once more. Before Donna could reply, I stood up from my seat. I then tapped on my bracelet and threw a small black object in her direction. Catch. Extending her hand, Donna caught the object. It was the recording device that I had used before. What's this? Donna curiously asked as she looked at the recording device. You'll find out later. I replied while heading out of the room. However, just as I came close to the exit of the room, my feet soon came to a halt. Where do you think you're going? Preventing me from getting out were a couple of professors. My brows creased. Move. I seriously asked. My words apparently were not appreciated by the professors, who proceeded to glare at me even more fiercely. Who do you, the professor began to say. Do as he says. Donna interrupted the professor. Staring at the recording device in her hand, she continued. Let him go. He's not the type of guy to kill without reason. If he's really guilty, we'll naturally take him away. However, I doubt this is the case. Boo. Enough. Donna raised her voice. Turning her head to glance in the professor's way, her eyes began to shine. The professor instantly shut up. Staring at the exchange, I couldn't help but think. What a useful power. To have the power to make someone instantly shut up. I wished I had that. Wait, I do. I secretly facepalmed. For a moment I almost forgot I had the one. Snapping me out of my thoughts was Donna's voice as she harshly scolded the professor trying to block my way. If you want to complain to someone, go and complain to Douglas. I'm sure he would have said the same thing. Gritting his teeth, the professor lowered his head. Understood. He replied in a rather weak voice before backing away. You can go, Ren, Donna said as she glanced my way. Glancing toward Donna's way, I secretly thanked her with a nod before leaving the room unobstructed. As I left the room, I couldn't help but think back at the words the other Ren said to me. I'll repeat it one more time. I'm not your enemy. Be it me or Everblood. We are not your enemies. You may not figure things out now, however you will soon know. If you want strength, use Monarch's indifference. So far you've only used a small fraction of its powers. If I want strength, use Monarch's indifference, huh? Staring at the empty hall in front of me, I caressed the bottom of my chin. Interesting. A few hours passed since then. We've confirmed the recording that you've sent. You're in the clear. The others are still somewhat unconvinced, but Douglas shut the up for you. That's good. Ding. Entering the elevator, I pressed the button for the last floor of the building. Soon the door closed. Is there anything else that you need to tell me? At the moment I was on a call with Donna. After what happened at the lock, I decided to head back home. However, because of all the people that were swarming the premise in order to find answers, it took me quite a while for me to get back home. By the time I was back home, Donna had already finished talking with Douglas and the other members of the upper board of the lock. She was currently briefing me on the conversation they had. Yes, there's going to be a press conference tomorrow and they want you to be there. I see. I pursed my lips. Rin, this is an opportunity for you to clear your name. I'm sure you've already seen the file that Monica sent you. With it, you should have no trouble getting your name cleared and, AJ. There was a brief pause in her sentence. Though I wasn't certain, I faintly heard the sound of Donna sighing. Did something happen? I wondered. However, I soon understood exactly why she was sighing. Rin, please don't say something unnecessary. Please don't do something like what you did back at the conference. You already have plenty of enemies. Please don't try to antagonize the whole world. Oh, that's not a good enough answer, Rin. Right? I half-heartedly replied. This obviously only further increased Donna's worries as she raised her voice a bit. Rain. Ding. The elevator bell suddenly rang and the doors opened. Before Donna could voice out more complaints, I quickly bid farewell. Donna, I'm in an elevator, the signal is pretty bad, I'm afraid I'll have to leave you. It was nice talking to you and thank Monica for me. Do the static sound that came at the end of each call rang in my ears. Sorry, Donna. Putting my phone away, I shook my head. There's simply no way I'm letting go of such an opportunity. There were just so many things that I wanted to say to the people. Walking down the corridor of the apartments, I soon stopped in front of my apartment and opened the door. Click. I'm home. Upon opening the door, I heard the sound of rushed footsteps heading for my way. Following this, I was greeted by a few familiar faces. Rin. The first one to greet me was my mother, who rushed in my direction. Already prepared for this, I merely just let her hug me. Was too tired to put any resistance. Within seconds, she appeared in front of me and embraced my whole body with her arms. Rin, I saw what happened on the news. What's going on? Is everything all right? You're not hurt, are you? What exactly happened? Oh my, you look quite pale, did you eat? Once she hugged me, I was instantly bombarded by an endless amount of questions. As expected, mothers were always mothers. Just as I was about to push her away, my dad appeared from behind and grabbed her by the back of her shirt. Samantha, stop asking questions, can't you see he's tired? It was only after my father's words that my mother finally moved her head back and looked at me properly. Her eyes squinted for a brief moment before her shoulders slumped down. Okay, fine. With a dejected look, she finally let go of me. However, just as she was about to let go, she suddenly remembered something and once again turned her head to face me. This time her face was a lot more serious. Rin, please don't tell me you're going to leave us again. There was a slight tremble in her voice following her last words. My brows furrowed a bit when I felt this. Brushing her hair to the side, she lowered her head and continued, I can understand that this situation is troublesome, but I don't want you to go. You just Cutting her off, I raised my hand. Stop right there, Mom. Glancing behind her for a short moment, I looked back at her and reassured her. You don't have to worry about the situation. I've got things handled, although I might end up losing my job, I won't be running away anymore. From the moment that I stepped back into the human domain, I had decided to never again be put in a similar situation. And thus, despite my current circumstances, I wasn't planning on leaving the human domain anytime soon. Plus, it wasn't like I was actually helpless about the situation. Raising my head, I looked at my mother dead in the eyes. I'll say this again, Mom, but you don't have to worry. I'm not leaving. Letting out a visible sigh of relief, it didn't take long for my mother to return to her usual cheerful self. Okay. Putting on a smile, she turned around. Since you have everything figured out, how about you join us in the living room? Nodding my head and taking off my shoes, I headed for the living room of the house. Right as I entered the living room, pausing for a second, I blinked a couple of times to make sure I wasn't seeing wrong. Once I was certain that I wasn't seeing wrongly, I turned my head to look at my mother and pointed in Nola's direction. Why is Nola lying down like that? I did find it odd that Nola had not greeted me the moment I entered the house, however, from the looks of things weren't as simple as I thought. With her face facing the ground, Nola laid on the ground with both her hands and legs spread apart. Twitch. Twitch. From time to time her body would start twitching. What in the world happened? I suddenly had an ominous premonition. A troubled look appeared on my mother's face as she turned to look toward the kitchen. About that. The cookies are ready. A soft voice echoed throughout the living room. Turning my head in the direction of where the voice came from, I was surprised to see Amanda. Amanda? You're here. With a soft nod, Amanda placed the cookies on the table. A nice buttery scent lingered in the room. Visit lworld.com for a better reading experience. Once she put the tray down, she cleaned her hands on the white apron she was wearing. I came here because I wanted to talk to you. Walking toward the cookies, I was left impressed by how good they looked. Pointing at them, I glanced at Amanda and asked, "Did you make these?" Amanda once again nodded her head. Wow, I didn't know you could cook. With how busy she was at her guild, I never thought she would have enough time to cook. I can't cook, Amanda shook her head. Your mother taught me. I nodded my head in understanding. That made more sense. Lowering my head and glancing at the cookies, I extended my hand in the direction of the cookies. Yes. Amanda replied. There was a visible twinkle in her eyes. It was clear to me that she wanted me to taste her cookies. I smiled when I saw this. Just as I was about to pick a cookie up, my mother suddenly spoke up. Ren. Yes. My hand came to a halt. Glancing in her direction, I asked. What's wrong? Opening her mouth, my mother eventually shook her head and sighed. You know what, never mind. My brows furrowed. However, considering that my mother always tended to act strangely, I didn't put much thought into it. Picking one of the cookies up, I smelled it for a second before putting it in my mouth. Crunch. It was at the exact moment that I took a bit of the cookie that everything started to make sense. Staring at Nola, who was still lifelessly lying on the ground, I proceeded to look at my mother, who lowered her head. Is it good? Cough. Letting out a muffled cough, I gazed at Amanda and forced a smile. Why, yes, cough. Weakly placing my hand on the table, I took a knee to the ground. Cough. It's Gria cough. But why is it cough? Spicy. I didn't know how it was possible, however, somehow the cookies were spicy beyond compare. Spicy. Tilting her head, Amanda glanced at the cookie tray. Wait. I tried to stop her, however it was too late. Extending her hand, Amanda took one of the cookies and took a bite of it. Not even a second after she placed the cookie in her mouth, and her face started to redden considerably. Slowly her eyes started to water. How? Amanda mumbled in dismay as she stared at her hands, which were currently shaking. Chapter 486. Click. 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 The clicking sound of the camera's shutter echoed throughout a large auditorium filled to the brim with people. Do you have anything to say regarding the current allegations? Are you really 876? Why did you frame Aaron Rhinestone? Is Aaron innocent? Standing in front of the seats were a series of reporters who asked an endless amount of questions. All of their attention was currently drawn toward the center of the room, or to be more precisely, toward my direction as I sat behind a large table. A few inches away from my mouth was a small microphone. Sitting beside me was Douglas. Seems like you're quite the popular one? Douglas joked as a small smile hung on his lips. Briefly glancing in his direction, I shrugged my shoulders. Guess I am. Nothing I could do about it. My charm was just that high. Douglas helplessly shook his head. You never change. I once again shrugged my shoulders. Just as I was about to say something else, the room instantly quieted down. By the way, Clyke. Following this, Octavius Hall entered the room. His entire presence enshrouded the whole room, making it hard for the reporters to muster any courage to speak. Even I was overwhelmed by his presence for a brief moment. It looks like he's made a small breakthrough. My eyes narrowed. I could feel it. He was a few years away from reaching rank. Glancing around the room for a couple of seconds, Octavius soon moved towards the table in the middle of the room and proceeded to sit down next to Douglas. Once he sat down, he crossed his arms and remained silent. For a brief moment of time, silence ensued. His overwhelming aura made it hard for the reporters to keep themselves composed. However, this did not last for long, as the reporters soon jumped back up from their seats and started to ask questions. Octavius Hall, what have you got to say regarding the allegations thrown out? Evidence points out that the leak is indeed true. Why is this happening? With all the attention drawn towards him, Octavius suddenly raised his hand and muttered. Quiet. Though his voice was quiet, It traveled through the ears of everyone present, and all the reporters suddenly found themselves seated in their seats with their backs drenched in sweat. Snapping out of it, the reporters glanced at each other. From the looks on their faces, it felt as though they were all wondering the same thing. What in the world just happened? Ignoring the commotion, Octavius opened his mouth. The moment he opened his mouth, everyone's focus once again turned to him. I'm sure everyone here has questions regarding the current allegations thrown at us. Many of you are wondering what is going on and whether they are true or not. Octavius suddenly paused. Closing his eyes for a brief moment, the temperature of the room dropped a couple of degrees. Opening his eyes again, he once again opened his mouth. And the answer to that it's true. However, right as he was about to finish his sentence, I directly cut him off. From where I was seated, I could feel his gaze suddenly land on me. Ignoring Octavius and with a nonchalant look on my face, I lazily looked at the reporters in front of me. Most of the stuff that was leaked is true. For a short moment of time, none of the reporters were able to utter a word as they all stared at me with a look filled with looks of shock. Beside me, I could feel Octavius's energy fluctuate slightly. Not sure about Douglas, as his energy remained calm. Everyone was quick to recompose themselves, especially the reporters. Instantly, everyone stood up and fervently started to ask questions. Click. 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 The cameras started flashing as the reporters started speaking over each other. Did you just say that all the leaks were true? Can you once again repeat your statement? Are you saying that you're really 876? And that the stuff that was leaked was true? Were the crimes reported by the Union really true? Because everyone was speaking over each other, it was hard to make out any of the questions they were asking. Lowering my head and massaging my forehead, I softly mumbled. How annoying. How in the world am I supposed to answer the questions if you are all speaking at once? Feeling Douglas's gaze from my right side, he once again shook his head. Turning his head to glance at the reporters, he lowered his hand. Quiet please. As he said those words, a trace of mana extended out from his hand, and all the reporters stopped speaking. Once silence returned in the room, Douglas looked at all the reporters in the room. If anyone has any questions to ask, please do so in an orderly manner. If you all ask questions at the same time, it will be impossible for us to hear what you are trying to ask. Pausing, Douglas's eyes squinted. Am I being clear? He sternly asked. All the reporters silently nodded their heads. Good. With a satisfied smile, Douglas turned to look at me. You can continue. Thanks. Thanking Douglas, I turned my attention back toward the reporters and cameras. I'll make this quick, so listen carefully. At the same time, inside of a small private room. I'm sure everyone here has questions regarding the current allegations thrown at us. Many of you are wondering what is going on and whether they are true or not. Seated on a small sofa and staring at a holographic image in front of them, Donna leaned her body forward. Worry flashed across her eyes. What are you so worried about, Donna? Seated next to her was Monica. Extending her hand, she grabbed a handful of popcorn and shoved them down her mouth. Munch. Munch. Are you worried about what's going to happen to Rin? Munch, if so, you don't have to worry, I've already given him the files. That's not it. Donna shook her head. That's not what I'm worried about. Oh, munch. Gulp. Swallowing the popcorn in her mouth, Monica turned to look at Donna. Then what are you worried about? Ha. Sighing out loud, Donna covered her forehead. I'm worried about what Rin is going to say. You know very well his mouth is just as unfiltered as yours. Monica's eyes squinted at Donna's subtle diss. Lowering her hand, she grabbed another handful of the popcorn. I think you're overthinking things. Halfway through her sentence, Monica stuffed her mouth with another handful of popcorn. Munch. Munch. It's not going to be that bad. Turning to glance in Monica's way, Donna lowered her head and softly mumbled. I wish so too. She really did. However, knowing Rin for how long she did, she knew that this could only be a pipe dream for her. Especially after her talk with him on the phone yesterday. At the moment, she could only wish that he wouldn't go overboard. I'll make this quick, so listen carefully. It was then that Ren's voice suddenly echoed through the speakers of the projection. Turning their attention back toward the holographic projection, Monica and Donna suddenly noticed that the atmosphere around Ren had started to change. His previous nonchalant look was gone, and what replaced it was a serious one. Seating a couple of seats beside him, Octavius Hall's brows furrowed. I want you all to understand one thing, Ren slowly said as his eyes remained fixed on the cameras in front of him. I don't care about any of you. Though soft, his words rang in the ears of everyone watching and listening like powerful thunderclaps inside of a raging storm. Lowering his head, Ren's voice deepened. My performance at the conference was for me, not for you. I am not your hero nor the hope that many of you are making me out to be. If I had to put it bluntly, don't mistake my previous deeds as me trying to be your savior. As I've said before, I couldn't care any less about any of you. Pointing his finger on the table, Ren leaned his body forward. You come here demanding answers from me as though I have suddenly betrayed all of your expectations and shit, huh? Ren suddenly scoffed. Raising his hand and brushing his hair back, he glanced at the camera and muttered. It makes me sick. Silence. As Ren's words echoed through the auditorium, absolute silence enveloped the area as no one dared to utter a single word. Or rather, they couldn't. How could they answer Ren's sudden words? Be it Douglas, Octavius, or any of the reporters. Everyone was just listening to Ren's words with a myriad of different expressions. Let me repeat this once again. I'm not your hero nor am I your hope. If you feel betrayed by the sudden revelations that I am 876, then tough luck. I quite frankly don't care about what you think. In the first place, it is you who put your expectations on me. Did I ever ask you to put your expectations on me? Ren shook his head. I didn't think so. Pausing for a brief moment, Ren turned to glance in Octavius's direction. Meeting his eyes for a brief moment, he once again started to speak. The same cannot be said about the Union. They are an organization dedicated to protecting you. They are the ones you should be placing your hopes into. Ren's eyes suddenly narrowed. However, just because they are an organization that is set to protect you, it doesn't mean that they also care about you. Tapping on his watch, a black holographic image materialized in front of Ren. Extending his hand, he pressed on the holographic screen and a recording suddenly started to play. Despite the fact that 876 saved you, we really can't do anything about the situation. On one hand, sign a treaty to bring peace to the human domain and stop the monolith from terrorizing the human domain for a few years and let us recuperate, and on the other hand sacrifice some unknown rank talent that we know nothing about. As the recording played, everyone in the room was able to hear a conversation between two individuals, both of whom were female. Yes, we are grateful for what he did, however, as the Union we are set to prioritize the lives of the many over one. It might come back and bite us in the future, however, this is the type of organization we are. What is done is done. Even though I have voted against the decision, the other heads all unanimously voted for 876 to be eliminated. In the end, he wasn't worth the sacrifice. The recordings lasted for a little over a minute, and once it reached its end, Ren tapped on his watch and turned off the holographic function. The silence from before continued to prevail over the auditorium. This conversation was a conversation between two of the heads of the Union. I won't say their names, but you can probably figure out from their voices who they are. As Ren was talking, he suddenly felt a small mana ripple spread from beside him. It didn't take a genius to understand who it belonged to. Since they were in front of everyone, Ren knew that Octavius couldn't do anything. Therefore, without minding Octavius, he continued. As you've all seen, this is how the Union thinks. They are an organization that won't think twice about sacrificing you if it leads to the better good of humanity. No matter how much you've helped them in the past, if they believe you are not worth it, they won't think twice about throwing you away. In this case, they chose to sacrifice me. Turning his head, Ren gazed in Octavius's direction. Once their eyes met, a soft smile appeared on his face. 876. Chapter 487. I felt a sudden sense of amusement rise from within me as I stared at Octavius. Even though I couldn't tell at first, he really did look like Melissa from up close. Was that possibly the reason for my sudden sense of amusement? I couldn't tell. Turning my attention back toward the reporters, I continued. You people are probably unaware about what truly transpired before a bounty was put on my head. However, if I had to summarize what happened, I would say, leaning my body a little, I placed my hand underneath my chin and looked upwards. I guess you could say that I did what the Union couldn't do for quite a while, and that's actually doing some damage to the monolith. Silence. Once again, despite of the words I just said, no one was able to say anything as they just continued staring at me with a dumb look on their face. They were apparently still processing what I previously told them. Regardless, I continued. To summarize what happened between me and the union, it would be like this. Raising my hand, I pointed at myself. I, Rendover, dealt more damage to the monolith than the union ever had in their whole existence. The piece of recording you just listed was proof of that. Why else do you think the monolith would be so adamant in using me as a counterparty for the union to sign the truce? Just for the sake of it? I shook my head. No, it's 'cause I can actually do something about them, unlike the union who can't seem to be able to do anything at this point. Shaking my head even more fiercely, I let out a sigh. Huh. Then, taking out a potion from my dimensional space, I quickly chugged it down. As I was chugging the potion down, I suddenly had a thought. Shit, I'm starting to become like Melissa. Over the past week, I had been taking the potions as though they were water. I need to do something about this. I knew that this couldn't keep going in the future. I needed to find a way to completely dispel my mental traumas. Plaque. Smacking the potion on the table, I gazed at the reporters. New novel underfunders are published here. lworld.com. That being said, the reason I'm telling all of you this is not because I want you people to realize just how shitty of an organization the union is. No, that's far from it. Raising my arm, I wiped the side of my mouth. Although I'm still pissed off about what the union did to me, at the end of the day I get their decision. Everyone has their priorities. Just like you people aren't my priority, my life isn't their priority. They are an organization designed to think the best for humanity. And back then, with all the information they had at their disposal, sacrificing me was the correct choice. Had I been in their position, I would have probably done the same. The faces of the reporters changed when they heard my words, however, I merely shrugged my shoulders when I saw this. As much as I wanted to antagonize the union, I truly did think that their decision wasn't wrong. There was simply no way for the union to know that I had taken the seat of limit in the past. Furthermore, they were also unaware of who I was exactly during the time I saved Monica and the others. I may hold some resentment for their decision, but I wasn't so blinded by rage to not understand their perspective. Though unfortunate, this was the cruel reality. I let out a long sigh. Supporting my chin with my arm, which was propped up on the table, I gazed into the eyes of every reporter present. The same thing could be said to have happened to Aaron. Even though he isn't exactly guilty, he also isn't exactly innocent. I won't get into too much detail about what he's done, however, he was simply used as a scapegoat by the union in order to let me come back to the human domain. If you compare me to him, who by the time was already dead, selling him out was the most appropriate decision. Lowering my head, I fiddled with the empty potion bottle in front of me. Don't get me wrong. Just because I'm bashing the union a lot, it doesn't mean I'm against their methods. All I'm trying to do is let everyone know what type of organization the union is. An organization that won't think twice about sacrificing you for the benefit of humanity. Pausing, I let go of the empty bottle in my hand. Raising my head, I closed my eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. Take this as a warning from someone who's been on the discarded side of the union. If you want to survive in this world, you must prove your worth. This was not a peaceful world. It was a world where the strongest survived and the weakest died. It may have not been apparent now, but in the very near future, this would become more and more apparent to the people. It was best to let the world realize this now before it was too late. Leaning my body forward a little, I turned my head in the direction of one of the cameras recording. Prove to the union that you aren't some expandable. Don't just start blaming the union or every organization out there for your problems. Raising my head, I glanced toward the ceiling of the room and asked. You have seen the crack in the sky, right? Because my eyes were currently on the ceiling of the room, I wasn't able to see the reactions of the people present. If you have, then I will let you know more. However, from how quiet everyone was being, I knew that everyone's attention was currently drawn toward me. Visit lworld.com for the best experience. The crack will continue to expand. The mana density in the world will increase, and so will your talent cap. If previously you had your talent cap to blame for your inability to climb to the top, now you don't. You may have lower resources than some others, but so did some of the current high rankers. You don't want the union to throw you away? Then you better get stronger, because in a couple of years' time, the least of your worries aren't going to be the union nor the monolith, but it will be the third cataclysm. At the exact moment I mumbled the last words, the eyes of many individuals present in the room started to open widely. Their previous silent and impassive expressions changed to that ones filled with shock, as some couldn't stop themselves from standing up. Finally, ever since I started speaking, the reporters mustered the courage to speak up. Impossible. It can't be. You must be lying. Voices filled with disbelief echoed throughout the room as the complexion of some of the reporters paled considerably. I couldn't blame them though. Everyone knew just how catastrophic a cataclysm was. Especially since the second cataclysm only happened 80 years ago. Knowing that a third one might happen, people would obviously start fearing for the worst. Some of you might be thinking that all I'm saying is a load of crap. However, I just wanted to let you know that in the few years that I was missing, I was actually in the Dwarven domain and the Elven domain. Turning my head, I glanced at Douglas, who looked back at me. After a short pause, Douglas nodded his head. Isn't that right, Douglas? Yes. Instantly, murmurs started to spread throughout the auditorium as the reporters started talking amongst themselves. Ignoring it, I continued to speak. As you all know, the other races have gone through what we're currently going through right now. So, listen well when I tell you this, get your shit together, because in a few years' time, this so-called momentary sense of peace that you are all enjoying will be gone, and what you will see will be the true beginning of the end. If there was a better time to let the world know about what was about to come soon, now was the best time. With the third cataclysm and the Demon King soon arriving, it was time for everyone to wake up from this false sense of peace that they were currently experiencing. Even though I was planning on defeating the Demon King wasn't the only enemy out there. There was an army of demons behind him. If humanity kept progressing at this rate, when the time came that the Demon King arrived on Earth, most of them would end up being dead weight. Shit. Lowering my head and massaging my forehead, I let out a small curse. Even though I just told them that I wasn't going to be their hero, I am literally sounding like one. Letting out another sigh, I brought the microphone closer to me. Vollenderskern novel on lworld.com. I think I've said enough. Before any of you jump up to ask me any questions, I'll make it clear now. I've already said what I wanted to say and I won't be answering any questions. Like I've said before, don't make me out as a hero just for your sake. If you're looking for one, then I've got the perfect candidate for you. Pausing, the edges of my lips curled upwards. And that's Kevin Voss. Covering my mouth with my hand, I had to once again pause as my shoulders trembled a little. For a brief moment I almost laughed out loud. Recomposing myself, I pushed the microphone back. Cume. Raising my hand into a fist, I coughed slightly. As I was saying, if you're looking for a push, someone to put your hopes into, then you can do that with Kevin. He's the type of guy that will care about random people that he doesn't know. As I spoke, I made sure to emphasize the last part. Simply put, I wanted to once again make it clear to everyone that I wouldn't get out of my way to save some random stranger's life if it meant that it could endanger my life. Just wasn't me. Once again staring at the reporters, I turned the microphone and stood up. I guess this is enough for me. Glancing at Douglas, who was next to me, I softly mumbled. I'll leave the next part to you. Sure, Douglas replied with a calm smile. With a slight nod, I glanced in Octavius's direction for a brief moment before leaving. His face was emotionless just as always, however I could tell that inside he was very mad. Couldn't blame him, I did after all publicly shame the Union in front of the whole world. That being said, I didn't regret my words one bit. And it wasn't like he could do anything about it. I may have just antagonized him in the half of the world, but I was confident enough to know that the Union wouldn't move regardless of what I did. Monica, Douglas, Gervis, and perhaps even the Elven Queen. Those were the individuals who Octavius knew were on my side. The Union simply had nothing to gain from attacking me or my family. Furthermore, with me saying all of this publicly, if anything did happen to me, the prime suspect would be the Union. Their reputation was already bad as it was. If they truly did try to silence me, their reputation would fall to a point where they would no longer be able to withstand the backlash. Heh. Leaving the auditorium, the edges of my lips curled upwards. This was satisfying. Chapter 488. No, it's 'cause I can actually do something about them. Unlike the Union, who can't seem to be able to do anything at this point. Staring at the projection in front of her, Monica munched on the popcorn in her mouth. Munch, munch, I guess you were right, Donna. His tongue really did go loose. Munch. There was a trace of amusement in her voice as she said those words. Clearly, she wasn't the least bit perturbed about the things that Ren had said on the projection. Munch. Hey, he even said that he doesn't care about anyone. Way to go, Ren. Besides her, Donna was in total dismay as she covered her face with her arms. I knew it. I knew that this was going to happen. Gulp. Swallowing the popcorn in her mouth, Monica patted Donna on the back. Secretly, she was just trying to get rid of the grease on her hands. Calm down, Donna. The one that should be most worried about the situation should be me. Unlike you, I'm actually working for the union, not that I disagree with what he's saying, but... Lowering her hand, she grabbed another handful of popcorn. Well, what's done, it's done. The moment I gave him the recording, I already knew that he was going to pull something like this. Stopping her hand right before her mouth, Monica sighed. Actually, I'm probably going to be in a bit of trouble since Daphne didn't know I was recording her back then. But, well, I'm ranked now. Softly chuckling, Monica stuffed her mouth with another handful of popcorn. Munch. Munch. What they gonna do about it? Gazing at the projection in front of her for a good minute, Donna eventually gave up. Well, all right. I knew that this was going to happen anyways. Though a small part of her prayed that Rin wouldn't pull something like this. Thinking back at the words he said, Donna realized that perhaps this was for the best. The crack in thy sky did indeed seem like a good indication that something big was about to happen. If Ren's words served as a catalyst to help humanity realize in just how much of a predicament they were in, then what he said wasn't as bad as she was making it out to be. There was only one problem. And that was the backlash that Ren's words would create throughout the world. For a good while, Donna knew that the human domain would be in a lot of turmoil. Turning her head to glance at Monica, who was carefreely eating her popcorn, Donna softly mumbled. It looks like we're going to be very busy this month. Because she had been so focused on the press conference, Monica was unable to hear Donna's mumbles. Turning her head, she asked. Did you say something, Donna? No. Staring at Monica for a good couple of seconds, Donna shook her head and sighed. Nothing, I didn't say anything. This _ content is taken from lworld.com. And that's Kevin Voss. PFTTTTTT. Spitting toothpaste all over the mirror, Kevin's eyes opened widely. Opening and closing his mouth like a fish stuck out of the water, Kevin almost dropped his phone on the ground. He had only woken up 10 minutes ago, and thus he did not have enough time to change as he was still in his boxers. The reason why he woke up so early was to watch Ren's press conference. However, midway through the press conference, Ren suddenly name-dropped him. How could Kevin not be shocked? Ren wouldn't. As I was saying, if you're looking for a pusho, someone to put your hopes into, then you can do that with Kevin. He's the type of guy that will care about random people that he doesn't know. Not even halfway through his sentence and Ren's voice once again rang out from the speaker of his phone. This time Kevin's body froze completely. He was trying to say pushover, wasn't he? For a brief moment of time, Kevin was unable to formulate a sentence as he found himself having a hard time trying to comprehend what he had just heard. Veins slowly started to protrude from the top of his forehead. Crack. Before he knew it, a cracking sound rang throughout the room, finally snapping Kevin out of his thoughts. Lowering his head to see what had happened, Kevin's face slowly started to turn red. Shit. Staring at this phone, a curse inevitably escaped from his mouth. That's my second phone this week. The plan has failed. A deep voice echoed throughout the surroundings as an elderly man with turbid gray hair and wearing a dark gray robe gazed at a small projection in front of him. Depicted in the projection was a youth with deep blue eyes and black hair. Hatred flashed across the elderly man's eyes as he stared at the youth in the projection. I guess you could say that I did what the Union couldn't do for quite a while, and that's actually doing some damage to the monolith. The more he listened to the youth in the projection, the greater the hatred in the elderly man's eyes became. Crack. Crack. Unknowingly, the elderly man's knuckles started to crack as the mana around him started to turn rampant. Relax. Just then a raspy voice rang from behind Imogen Hao. At the exact moment his words echoed, the mana around Imogen Hao relaxed. Without turning around, Imogen Hao kept his gaze on the projection in front of him. You said that to leave things up to you. Yet it doesn't look like your plan succeeded. It did. The most up-to-date NOV_ are published under lworld.com. Refuting Imogen Hao's words was the same raspy voice. If you're talking about 870 SIXS situation, then yes, the plan could be considered to be a failure. However, if you're talking about the plan in an objective manner, it did not fail. The Union has suffered considerably from this ordeal. After deliberating over the matter, Imogen Hao's eyes began to squint. Indeed, if we set 876 aside, the plan could be considered a success in its own way. It can't be considered a total failure. We may have not achieved what we wanted with 876, however, the seeds of distrust against the Union have been planted. If we take advantage of this situation, we may be able to harvest a lot out of this situation. The same raspy voice from before continued speaking. You just have to be patient and think long-term. There will be plenty of opportunities against 876. Especially if we manage to break down the natural order established in the human domain. Crossing his arms, Mo Jinhao's face turned solemn as he deliberated over the words. His words aren't wrong. Because of the contract, we can't directly attack the Union or the human domain. However, just like the demon said, if we take advantage of this situation, we may be able to plant even more seeds of chaos in the human domain. Once that happens, getting to 876 should not be a problem. The monolith's goal was to create as much discord as possible in the human domain. This was so that they could break the natural established order and recruit more people for their cause. So far, although their plan did not succeed as much as Mo Jinhao wanted it to, as he wanted nothing more than to break 876 into bits, the current situation was very favorable for them. With it, they could plan for the future when the contract finally expired. Alright, I've come to a decision. Raising his head, Mo Jinhao finally turned his head around, where his eyes soon paused on a black humanoid figure sitting down on a small red couch with a wine cup in his hands. Swirling the cup in his hand and bringing it toward his nose, the demon took a couple of sniffs of it. Ugh. His face soon grimaced. Moving the cup away from himself, the demon's eyes squinted considerably as he moved his head to the side. I still don't understand how you humans can possibly like this sort of stuff. Putting the cup down, the demon raised his head to look at Mo Jinhao. Their eyes soon met and a smile emerged on his face. It looks like you've finally come to terms with reality. Yes. Mo Jinhao nodded his head. We may have not been able to trouble 876 as much as we wanted, but we have indeed achieved our main objective. Moving toward the projection, he quickly turned it off. I'll be leaving to talk to the leader. If you will excuse me. Swinging his arm, Mo Jinhao's robe flung behind him as he directly headed for the exit of the door, leaving Everblood behind. Click. With a loud sound, the room door shut and silence surrounded the room. Coo coo coo. The silence was eventually broken by Everblood's amused laugh as his head moved back. With both arms on the back of the sofa, Everblood's raspy voice echoed across the empty space. Who would have thought that the plan we worked so hard for would fail like this? He managed to utter amidst his laugh. It's better this way. It was then that an apathetic voice devoid of any emotion sounded from beside Everblood as a figure appeared next to him. Better. Unperturbed by the figure's sudden appearance, Everblood tilted his head. You're saying that it's better like this? Or are you saying that this was also planned by you? The figure closed his eyes. Who knows? Leaning his body forward, the figure grabbed the wine cup on the table and sniffed the wine. Planned or not planned, if he was incapable of doing this much, it would only mean that he wasn't improving. Also, bringing the glass cup to his mouth, the figure slowly took a small sip. Plike, plike, plike. A small rattling sound echoed throughout the room as the chains binding his hands clashed against each other. Ha! Upon taking a sip of the drink, a satisfied smile formed on his face. The game wouldn't be fun if everything went as I wished. Everblood's head moved back. The smile on his face deepened. Indeed, if he wasn't able to do this much, everything would simply be too boring. I may not understand what you're trying to do, but so far I haven't been disappointed. This truly is fun. Clink. Placing the cup down, the figure crossed his legs. The room suddenly became tense and the smile on Everblood's face quickly wiped. How is the situation going on your end? The figure asked. His emotionless voice sent shivers down Everblood's spine. Everything is going just as planned, Everblood replied as his back unknowingly straightened. Connell has inserted himself in the deeper ranks of the monolith, and will soon break into the rank. Following Everblood's words, silence shrouded the room as the figure slowly closed his eyes. It wasn't long before he eventually opened them. Good. He slowly started to nod his head. In a slow manner he turned his head to face Everblood, revealing his deep blue eyes. Don't forget why you're here. Don't stray away from it. Make sure you accomplish it. Yes. Standing up, the figure walked toward the other side of the room. Following him from behind were thick black chains. Plike, plike, plike. He eventually stopped in front of the door of the room. Raising his hand and tracing his finger over the door of the room, the figure slowly closed his eyes and suddenly asked, "What do you think makes destruction so beautiful?" It's. Before Everblood had a chance to reply, slowly opening his eyes, he softly mumbled, "I'm not a very emotional guy. Some might argue that I have long lost my emotions, but watching everything you've worked hard for destroying something that someone else worked just as hard for, it really does move my heart. Like I've said, Ren. I'm not your enemy." Chapter 489. What do you think about the comments in the press conference? Will there really be a third cataclysm? I say that this is hearsay. All bullshit fabricated in order to shift our attention away from his crimes. Then how would you explain the current phenomenon that just happened? The crack in the sky? It is undeniably there. We can't just turn a blind eye to it. Furthermore, there is evidence that proves that Rindover has really traveled to the other domains. Click. Turning off my phone, I put it away and continued to walk on the sidewalk of the street. I was currently outside of my house and the blazing sun in the sky made me feel extremely languid. I really didn't feel like doing anything. Despite that, I still continued walking. My current destination was the Demon Hunter Guild. The reason for this was because Amanda granted me access to their top-end training facilities. As matters currently stand, I couldn't go back to the lock. With everything that transpired over the last couple of days, I was put on administrative leave for a couple of days. Therefore, I had no choice but to go train at Amanda's guild. Along the way, I couldn't help but think, I really should tell Small Snake to invest more money in the headquarters. Just before the press conference, Amanda came to talk to me about the situation with the magic cards, and from the look of it, they will be launching in a couple of days' time. With the money that would be coming in from their sales, I planned on creating my own state-of-the-art training facility back in the headquarters. Not just for me but for Small Snake and the others. I think it's bullshit. Even if the mana density of the world increased, it will still be impossible for normal people like us to reach the top. Does that really matter? If the third cataclysm is coming, would you be better off at your current strength or at a stronger level? That's a big if. Still doesn't hurt to become stronger. As I neared the guild, I was able to overhear the conversation of some of the people near me. Overhearing their conversations, I shook my head. Just as I expected, everyone is talking about the press conference. Public opinion about what I said at the press conference was divided into two. On one side, many people supported what I said as they also agreed with many of my points, while on the other side, people completely despised me for it. Not that I cared. Like I've said before, I didn't really care about anyone else apart from a select few people. I was only one person after all. Halt. Because of security reasons, we can't allow anyone unknown to enter the guild. Please state your purpose. Tall guards wearing black suits and sunglasses blocked my path right at the entrance of the guild. Glancing toward my right and left and seeing people going in and out of the building, I could already tell that they were targeting me. Evidently, they were alarmed by my strength. Shaking my head, I brought out a black card from my dimensional space. Here you go. Did Amanda buff up the security because of the magic cards? So it was understandable. Given just how much money was involved in its launch, such measures were understandable. Lifting his glasses up with one of his fingers, one of the bodyguards checked my card. Upon making sure that there was nothing wrong with it, he took a step to the side. The guard next to him followed suit. You may go in. Thank you. Taking my card back, I nodded at the guards and entered the premise of the building. Just like in the past, a nice lavender-like smell lingered in the air the moment I entered the building. Glancing around me, I was surprised to find that the lobby of the guild was packed with people moving in and out of the building. It's a lot more crowded than usual. Is something going on? Squinting my eyes and checking out the place for a bit, I eventually shrugged my shoulders. It's probably none of my business. Let's just go train. Taking one last look at the crowd at the guild lobby, I turned around and headed for the elevators in the distance. At the same time, inside a white room that was the length of 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Show. Splitting the air apart were 3 translucent blue energy beams. In a matter of seconds, the arrows arrived all the way toward the other side of the room and crashed against multiple thick rectangular pillars. Bang! A deafening sound spread out from the point of contact between the arrows and the pillars, and thin black smoke rose in the air. Squinting her eyes and staring toward the distance, Amanda had an unsatisfied look on her face. "What's wrong, young miss?" Appearing beside her was her assistant, Maxwell, as he handed her a white towel. Taking the towel, Amanda shook her head. "I'm still too weak." "Weak?" Maxwell raised his brow. "Correct me if I'm wrong, young miss, but aren't you already nearing rank? Considering your age, shouldn't that be an achievement to be proud of?" Raising her bow and aiming at the target in the distance, Amanda pulled the bowstring back. A blue translucent arrow materialized in between her fingers. Achievement to be proud of. Had it been in the past, then maybe. However, as she looked back at Ren, Kevin, and Jean, who had all surpassed her, Amanda couldn't bring herself to feel any pride in her strength. Also, Amanda did not doubt Ren's words back at the conference. A third cataclysm will soon appear, and without a doubt she was still far too weak to survive it. Her current level of strength was far from enough. "I've still got a long way to go." Show. Visit to lworld.com discover_new novels. Once her words faded, Amanda once again released the string of her bow, and the arrow on her bow disappeared. The air in front of her distorted, and not even a split second after she released the bow, a thunderous explosion reverberated throughout the room. Boom. Following the explosion, a gust of wind began to spread out, resulting in Amanda's hair flailing wildly. Staring at the pillar in the distance, Amanda lowered her bow and turned to glance at Maxwell. "Has he arrived yet?" "Yes, he has," Maxwell replied with a short nod. His face slowly turned serious. "I have told him to meet you at your office, however, he insisted on meeting you here. He appears to be in a bit of a rush." "Okay." Amanda put her bow away and untied her hair, letting them fall over her shoulders. "It's better this way." "Not bad." The room I was in looked to be about the size of a small football pitch. It was neither too big nor too small. The insides were completely empty as the bright lights from above illuminated the white room. "The room here is created with one of the hardest materials that we have available. It may not be one of our strongest rooms, but considering your strength, this should do just fine. You would need to be at least rank to leave a scratch on the room." An attendant spoke aloud next to me. She was giving me a brief overview of the training facility. From time to time I would nod at her words. This was my first time here, and thus I needed to be briefed on the rules of the place. The lady continued to talk for the next 5 minutes before she eventually finally left the room. "Because you've selected the self-training room, there is no equipment available for you to use. However, if you wish to use them, you can call me up and I will readily come to your assistance." "Thank you." "No problem." Click. The door closed and the place finally became quiet. Raising my hand, I removed the mask from my face. Since I was now even more popular than before, I had no choice but to wear this wherever I went. Not that I wasn't used to it by now. Putting my mask away and moving toward the middle of the room, I decided to sit cross-legged. Tapping on my bracelet, I took out my sword and placed it right in front of me. Compared to the last time I had seen it, the sword was now quite a bit longer than before. Not by much, but enough to see a notable difference. Now that I think about it, I've still not tested the sword after breaking the first seal. According to Malvel, the first seal was supposed to break upon me reaching rank. Lowering my hand, I began to check the effects of the first seal. Visit to lworld.com discover_new novels. Seal 1. The sword will allow the wielder to gather at a much faster rate than normal. This. Staring at the interface in front of me, I had to blink a couple of times to make sure that I wasn't seeing wrongly. Once I was sure that there was nothing with what I was seeing, my mouth dropped a little. This is amazing, isn't it? It may not look like an incredible skill at first, however, given my circumstances and sword art, this was nothing short of miraculous. It was then that I had a sudden thought. With this, wouldn't I be able to perform my movements even faster than before? It would take me a couple of seconds to gather enough mana to perform any of the movements of the keiki style. With this new skill, the time it took for me to gather enough mana to perform the skill would drastically decrease. It was basically a game changer. Staring at the sword, my hand started to twitch. For a brief moment I wanted to test out this new skill, however I quickly stopped myself. This is not what I'm here for. There was a time and place for things. Taking a deep breath and closing my eyes, I cleared all distracting thoughts inside of my head and proceeded to feel the mana in the air. I felt the sensation a couple of weeks ago, and now that the mana density of the mana in the air is denser, there should be no trouble for me to finally grasp the fifth movement of the keiki style. There were only 5 movements to the keiki style. Beyond that, Grandmaster Keiki had never been able to grasp the 6th movement. Some might say that the keiki style was a complete art and that there were no possible movements beyond the 5th movement. However, I beg to differ. There was definitely a 6th movement, one that Grandmaster Keiki couldn't grasp throughout his entire life. After practicing this art for as long as I did, I knew for a fact that the 5th limit was not the limit. There was definitely more to the sword art than it showed. After grasping the 5th movement, my next goal was to grasp the 6th movement of the keiki style. Exhaling from my mouth, the scions around me started to vibrate more and more. It wasn't long before only the green-colored scions remained around me. From time to time, I would be able to see faint yellow-colored particles. My eyes brightened when I saw them. Light scions, the key element needed to grasp the 5th movement of the keiki style. Staring at the yellow-colored particles in the air, I focused all my attention on them. It wasn't long before more and more yellow-colored particles started to form around me. Drip, drip, drip. Sweat started to trickle down the side of my face. My breathing started to become more laborious. However, I didn't care. Placing my hand on the ground and grabbing my sword, I stood up and proceeded to take a stance. In the process, the light-colored particles around me started to gather in the direction of my sword. A bright light soon started to form around the scabbard of my sword as more and more light-colored particles started to gather around the sword. It wasn't long before the light became even brighter and enveloped the entirety of the room. Chapter 490. To master the 5th and final movement, one must assimilate the light scions in the air toward their sword. The last movement is not something that anyone can pull off comfortably. It's a movement that does not need the body to do anything. Let the scions do the work and let the sword flow naturally. Recalling the words imprinted inside of my mind, I tried my best to keep myself focused as I gathered the light scions toward me. There wasn't much I knew about the 5th movement of the keiki style. However, from the little words and images inside of my head, I knew that it heavily relied on light scions. This was why at the moment, I had gathered all my focus toward the air, trying my best to agglomerate all the light scions toward my sword. The process was very slow, however, with due time the sword in my hand started to become brighter and brighter. Before I knew it, the glow coming out from the sword was so bright that it made it difficult for me to keep my eyes open. Not yet. Trying my best to remain in this state, beads of sweat started to drip down the side of my face. It may have been because the room was quiet and that I was currently focused on trying to gather the light scions in the air, but the dripping sound of the sweat hitting the ground deeply resonated inside of my head. Drip, drip. The state of my mind was like that of a calm lake. Rippleless. Unknowingly, the surroundings disappeared from my view and all I saw was pitch-black darkness. I couldn't exactly describe the state that I was in, however, at the moment, it felt as though I was one with the mana in the air. My breathing stopped and my hand started to move. Grasping the hilt of the sword, I slowly pulled away. Click. A subtle clicking sound rang out and the room flashed in white. Been a while, Jean said as he entered the training grounds and nodded in Amanda's direction. Glancing around the place, he commented, "Not bad. Thank you." Amanda replied as she handed Maxwell her towel. Staring at Jean, her brows slowly started to crease. "Why did you want to meet me here? My office would have been a more appropriate setting for our discussion. It would have been a waste of time." Amanda tilted her head, obviously confused by Jin's answer. Before she could reply, Jean started to speak. A slight smile hung on his lips. "I never took you for a scheming one. Back then I didn't realize why you agreed to the deal so easily. Now I know." Slowly, his eyes started to narrow. "It's because of those magic cards." "Oh." Amanda thought back at the time when she made a deal with Jean. Pre-conference. A slight smile emerged on her lips. "Circumstances were different back then. You still benefited from the deal." "I guess you're right," Jean softly mumbled in an almost inaudible voice. He couldn't deny her words that said if he had to be honest, looking at things now, the deal wasn't as good as he thought it was back in the past. Secretly, he shook his head and cut straight to the chase. "The source of this undefector. Lworld.com. Amanda, The reason why I'm here is because we've located a big supply station near the outskirts of the Northern District. We're still monitoring the situation closely, but it looks like we need to join hands to complete this mission. Listening to Jin's words, Amanda's brows creased a little as she fell into deep thought. Supply station? Raising her head to meet Jin's eyes, she asked. What do you need us to do exactly? Nothing too straining. Elaborate. I just need a couple of rankers to come and help us. We won't need rankers, but just in case I'll bring one from my side. You should also bring one from your side. Just in case something goes wrong. After having analyzed the place thoroughly, Jin found that this was the best probable formation needed to take care of the place. Had it been the past, Jin would have never have collaborated with Amanda over this matter. However, as matters currently stood, Jin could not afford to bring out such a large force. Ever since the crack in the sky appeared, all of the guild members had been allocated toward different portals in case a dungeon overload occurred. Not only that, with the sudden increase in the mana in the air, many chose to use this time to break through to the next rank. In other words, Jin's guild currently did not have enough personnel to handle this mission. Given their time constraint, he had no other choice but to collaborate with Amanda. With her hand under her chin, Amanda had a thoughtful look on her face. Lowering her hand, she asked, "Are you sure that we only need one ranker?" "Yes," Jin replied with a nod. "I'm confident that we won't need more than 2 rankers." In fact, Jin was fairly certain that he wouldn't need 1 ranker. Bringing 2 was him already being cautious. "I see." Amanda extended her hand in Maxwell's direction. "Maxwell, please hand me the files." "As you wish." Tapping on his ring, Maxwell took out a file of papers and handed it to Amanda. "Thank you." Thanking Maxwell, Amanda proceeded to look through the files. As she looked through her list, Amanda's lips pursed from time to time. She didn't look at the files for too long as she soon closed the folder. Handing it back to Maxwell, she gazed in Jin's direction. "I've just looked through the list of available members we have at the moment, and it looks like it's DOA. Right then." Just as she was about to finish her sentence, in the room next door, a thunderous explosion reverberated as the room Amanda and Jin were in shook, alarming the both of them. Boom. For a split second of time, neither was able to react as they stared at each other. The first one to react was Amanda, who quickly dashed out of the training room. D. Coming out of the training ground, Amanda was met with the blaring sound of the sirens ringing. Following her from behind was Jin, who looked around with a serious look on his face. "What happened?" "I don't know." Amanda shook her head. Just like Jin, her gaze was extremely serious. Her bow quickly materialized on her right hand. "We might be under attack," she softly muttered. The most up-to-date NOV_scrolls are published under forherlworld.com. Glancing around the place, Amanda's gaze soon paused on one of the attendants rushing in the direction of where the explosion originated from. Taking a step forward, Amanda stood in her way. Grabbing her by the shoulders, she asked, "What's going on?" "Hey, young miss." Recognizing Amanda, the attendant flinched. Recomposing herself, she alarmedly looked at a room in the distance. Young miss, I don't know, but the data is saying that the explosion came from over there." "There." Letting go of the attendant's shoulders, Amanda didn't waste any time and rushed in the direction of the room. Stopping right in front of the door, Amanda channeled the mana inside of her body. Just as she was about to enter, she once again turned to look at the attendant. "Do you know who entered the room?" "Yes." Nodding her head, the attendant took out a small card and handed it to Amanda. "This is pass that the individual handed to us before entering the place." "The pass." Taking the pass from the attendant's hands, Amanda's bow lowered. Her frown quickly relaxed and she let out a long sigh. What's going on?" Jin asked as he noticed Amanda's sudden change in stance. Turning her head to look at Jin, Amanda shook her head and put the card away. "It's nothing." Also putting her bow away, Amanda proceeded to open the door. Click. At the exact moment she opened the door, smoke started to spill out from the door, prompting Amanda to raise her hand and swiping it, creating a small wind funnel that cleared away the dust. Her brows, which had previously relaxed, once again furrowed. "What's going on?" Taking a step into the room, Amanda's feet came to an abrupt halt as her eyes paused toward a figure in the middle of the room. Her eyes opened widely. Cough. With his back hunched on the ground and holding onto what seemed to be his wrist, an individual coughed up blood on the ground. Caw. Rin. Amanda instantly became alarmed as she rushed in his direction. Upon arriving next to him, she was able to get a better look at him, and worry flashed across her eyes. Taking a knee, she took a couple of tissues from her dimensional space and wiped Ren's mouth, which was covered in blood. "What happened to you?" Amanda asked with a worried look. His complexion at the moment was extremely pale, and not only that, lowering her head to glance in the direction of Ren's arm, she found that his right hand was broken. A couple of meters away from his was his sword, which was stained in blood. Cough, cough. Ren once again started to cough up blood. Snapping out of it and tapping on her necklace, Amanda took out a potion from her dimensional space and quickly fed to Ren. Here. Because of Ren's current state, in which he seemed to be completely out of it, Amanda brought it upon herself to chug the potion down his mouth. Because he was coughing up blood, he had most likely sustained serious internal injuries. It was best to give him a potion now to make sure that his injuries wouldn't aggravate. Ugh. Drink it, Amanda said in a stern tone as she raised the potion up. Opening his eyes and staring at Amanda, Ren raised his left hand and grabbed the potion. Amanda let go of the potion when she saw this. Whilst this was happening, walking around the room, Jean walked toward the other end of the room. Coming to a halt, his eyes traced over a large scar on the side of the wall. The scar wasn't exactly deep. If he had to make an estimate, it would be around 1/4 meter in depth. However, what was most shocking about it was the fact that it traced from one end to the other end of the wall. Turning his head to glance in Ren's direction, his eyes paused on Ren's sword, which was pointed in the direction of where the scar was. Turning his head back to gaze at the scar, he traced his finger over the scar. Staring at his finger, Jean slowly opened his mouth. "Amanda, just how durable is the room?" Snapping out of her daze, Amanda looked at Jean. She soon also noticed the scar on the wall. Her eyes darted back to Rin, who was slowly starting to get better. Alternating her gaze between Rain and the scar on the wall, Amanda had a sudden thought. It can't be. Amanda felt her mind blank. With her eyes still locked on the scar all the way on the other end of the room, Amanda slowly stood up. Without looking back, she called out for her assistant. "Maxwell?" "Yes." "Was the room in this state before?" "This." Maxwell had a troubled look on his face as his gaze paused on the scar in the distance. "I'm not exactly Sue." "It wasn't." A female voice answered for Maxwell. It was the same attendant from before. Nodding her head, Amanda's head finally turned. Biting her lips, she looked toward the assistant. "Has the room been inspected before it was being used?" Despite already knowing the answer, Amanda still asked. It was just too hard for her to currently process what was happening. It wasn't rare for someone to bridge the gap between subranks, as there were many occasions in which such things happened. Amanda just couldn't fathom how it was possible for someone who was ranked to deal enough damage on the wall that only ranks could damage. No, it wasn't like that. Opening her mouth, Amanda's eyes closed. He got stronger again. "Amanda, you didn't answer my question." Snapping her out of her daze was Jin's voice. How durable is this room?" Jean repeated. Opening her mouth, Amanda closed it again and bit her lips. This persisted for a couple of seconds before she eventually answered. "It should be rank."